around 1 in 5 people who are using a loan shark have met their loan shark. They're transacting through work.
We've had cases in hospitals, we've had cases in warehouses, in markets, logistics companies, even in local authorities. You know, it could literally be anywhere where people go. And you'd think it might become less common now we're all using Teams and not seeing each other face to face, but that doesn't seem to be the case.
Meet over half of the working world. They are the machine that powers our society, from pouring your coffee and emptying your bins, through to caring for a relative or delivering your parcels. You may see them as essential or frontline workers, or you might not see them at all. The Invisible Worker podcast explores the financial landscape of Britain's most diligent workforce. We speak to experts in policy, inclusion, and research to understand their challenges and start to figure out how we can solve them. Hi, I'm Emily. I'm the host of the Invisible Worker podcast. For today's episode, we are exploring the murky world of illegal money lending, also known as loan sharks or loan sharking. And we're talking about illegal money lending on the Invisible Worker podcast because the shape of who uses a loan shark has changed over the last 20 years. And right now, around half of people who use a loan shark are in work. And I'm joined today by Cath and Anna from the illegal money lending team. If you are watching this, you will notice that you can't see Anna's face, and that's for her security to protect her identity because of the work she does in her community. Cath and Anna, welcome. Thanks for coming on the show.
Thank you for having us.
Pleasure to be here.
Anna, I wanted you to tell us kind of what a loan shark is.
If you do not have permission to lend from the Financial Conduct Authority, you lend to 2 people or more, and you charge interest, you are a loan shark.
So if I lend a friend some money, but I don't charge them interest, I'm okay.
You're okay. It has to be the 3 criteria. It has to be 1, 2, 3. If somebody gives you a cash loan of £500 and they ask you back for £500, there is no issue because they are not extorting you for money. But the moment they start to charge you interest, that's when they're starting to tread in very murky water.
Okay.
And we will be very interested in that behaviour.
And so this somebody who maybe gives me £500 and then starts charging interest, who's potentially a loan shark, what would be my clues? So how would I figure out that somebody is a loan shark?
Well, the quickest way, in my opinion, to identify if somebody is a loan shark is because they wouldn't have given you any paperwork, no contracts, no receipts. If you had got a legitimate loan, you would have evidence of that legitimate loan, right? And so friend, neighbour, work colleague, man in the pub, if they're giving you a cash loan and they're saying, pay me this figure back, but they don't give you any paperwork, there's nothing to suggest that they've given you this amount, how much you should be paying back, what the rules, what the regulations are. That's when you've got to think to yourself, hold on a minute, I don't have anything to show for the fact that I've borrowed this money. That's your first sign. Then you start to look out for the behaviour. The moment a payment is due and you don't know when that's going to be, because they do say pay me back whenever you can. The following week, a fortnight later, they want their money. So the moment you are unable to pay, the moment you fall down on the amount they want you to pay, that's when the behaviour changes.
So that sounds like easy enough to identify after the fact. Is there anything I can look for that tells me somebody might be, operating as a loan shark? As in, when I imagine what that person might look like, I imagine, someone shady, the heavy who's coming in to sort of do all sorts of nefarious activities. Is that the reality?
No, not at all. There's a spectrum of illegal lender. And so 1 in 5 of the people we arrested last year was female, which always surprises people. We have lady loan sharks on the patch as well as male loan sharks. We've prosecuted people who've been in their 80s.
In their
80s for illegal lending. And obviously there the threats look a bit different and the control looks a bit different, but they're still extorting money from people at high rates of interest. And I think from the borrower's point of view, there's kind of 3 categories. There's people who deliberately choose to borrow from a loan shark, absolute desperation. I need money now. This is my only option. There's people who think they're borrowing from a legitimate company. And that's where the lack of paperwork would be a big red flag for me. And also there's people who think they're borrowing from a friend, and that's the hardest one to tell because friends do lend friends money. If someone's offering to lend you money and you were bridesmaid at their wedding, you went to school together, you've known each other 20 years, probably absolutely fine. Genuine friendship, not a problem. If it's someone you vaguely know, more of an acquaintance than a friend, I'd be suspicious.
20 years ago, the predominant usage of loan sharks was by people who were out of work or in benefits. And that's really changed over time. So the demographic shape of who uses an illegal moneylender looks quite different today. And it is about half who are in work.
About half, yeah. And the majority of those are in full-time employment as well.
So this kind of leads me on to the next fact, which I learned from you, Cath. Around 1 in 5 people who use a loan shark, that's actually through work. They've met them at work because they're a colleague.
Yeah, absolutely. Someone who works in the same place that they see every day.
There are different estimates of the size of the problem, the size and shape of illegal money lending in the UK today. So there's data from the FCA Financial Lives survey, which suggests around 200,000 people use an illegal moneylender. The Centre for Social Justice put out a figure of 1.08 million, and that's the figure that you use. And I just want to benchmark that because there's another financial product that gets a lot of noise, which is payday loans or high-cost short-term credit. And payday loans are a regulated, legal financial product. And the latest estimate is that around 600,000 people use payday loans. So if we take the Centre for Social Justice number, nearly twice as many people use illegal lenders versus legal high-cost lenders.
It's a big market. It's a big market. The Centre for Social Justice figures 2% of the population, which means theoretically most people will know somebody who's borrowed from a loan shark if those people were kind of evenly spread out across the country.
That's crazy.
It is.
I can't imagine knowing somebody who's borrowed from a loan shark. There was a few things that surprised me when I was digging into kind of illegal money lending for this episode. So one was over half, so 56% of people thought the loan shark was their friend before they started borrowing. And then I linked that up with some data from the FCA Financial Lives survey from 2022, which suggested around 8% of the population borrow from friends and family. So I thought, God, if 8% of the population are borrowing from friends and family, but half of people borrowing from an illegal moneylender think that they're borrowing from a friend, there's got to be something more going on here.
100%, I think. And that the average process between knowing it's not your friend is something like 2 to 3 years, because you've got to realise what's going on here. And that's really difficult to do sometimes when you're in the moment, because as long as you pay them back, they'll be nice as pie to you. It's only when maybe you challenge it and say, hang on, surely I've paid back the total amount by now. Or you maybe something comes up, you need school shoes for the kids and you say, look, can I just miss a month? Or there's another challenge in some way that they actually turn nasty and you think, hang on a second, maybe this isn't my friend. From there, you've got to realise it's a loan shark. From there, you've got to realise that's a criminal offence. And from there, you've got to realise that we exist to report it. So that whole process is 2 to 3 years. So if you think, going back to that data, 8% people borrowing from friends and family, but half the people thought they were borrowing from a friend when they borrowed from a loan shark, you could get into very scary stats indeed.
You could, and I think also when you described who a loan shark might be, and the age profile and 20% being women, I was really shocked to read a recent enforcement case where it was 2 women, and they'd been operating for 16 years in Tooting in South London, lending to the Filipino community. They'd lent over £4.2 million, so not small numbers, and they were being ordered to pay back £1.2 million of sort of illegal proceeds of crime. But what shocked me the most was it was a 67-year-old and a 71-year-old woman, which I was never, ever expecting to see.
No, absolutely. And you think, you get the big burly man image, don't you? Because you think that's how they control people. But a lot of what they do is a lot subtler than that. So, if you can't control people by your presence, by your physical presence, you find another way to control them. And in cases that we've seen, that might be about threatening to tell your partner that you've got a loan if the partner doesn't know. It might be about, if it's in the workplace, threatening to say to the boss, you want to watch Anna, she might have her hand in the till because she owes me money. It might be about shaming you on social media. We had a case recently, a single mum, she'd bought school shoes. She borrowed for school shoes, and the loan shark put on social media that she owed him money for drugs. It was a drugs debt. And her mum saw that because her mum was Facebook friends with her. So there's all different ways that they can control you. So you don't actually need a physical presence to control people and get them to keep giving you money.
Okay, I want to talk now about what the illegal money lending team does, but you're also branded as Stop Loan Sharks. So that's your web and social media presence.
Absolutely. I always say when I say I work for the illegal money lending team, it makes it sound like I lend money illegally. But this is not a confession. With the anti-illegal money lending team, it just gets even worse, doesn't it? So yeah, Stop Loan Sharks I much prefer because it kind of describes what we do. So we are a trading standards team. We're not the police, although we do second police officers to work with us because it's trading standards legislation that we enforce. Team very much of 2 halves. We have investigators who are split east and west across the country. They go out on a week-by-week basis investigating loan sharks. So that might be talking to witnesses and getting statements. It might be looking at bank account details. It might be actually going into loan sharks' property with a search warrant to look for evidence of illegal lending. And they will then take those cases through the courts. The other half of the team, which Anna and I work on, is called Liaise, and we do all the kind of awareness raising, the victim support, the witness support, and trying to stop people going to loan sharks in the first place. But very much that kind of softer side being the liaise role, and then the investigators who have the power to search properties, arrest loan sharks, and take them through the criminal justice system.
Stepping back in time a little bit to 2002, the Proceeds of Crime Act, that was sort of a catalyst for getting this set up, because that was a change which meant, and this is crazy that it didn't happen before, if you did something illegal, you couldn't keep your ill-gotten gains. So the Proceeds of Crime Act means that when somebody has done an illegal activity, they have to hand over their assets. Their assets can be seized. And that's part of how you're funded. So you get to keep, am I right in saying it's a third of all the money you recover you get to keep?
We do, through the courts. I love the Proceeds of Crime Act. One of the best things about it, it's got a reverse burden of proof. So in criminal legislation, we have to prove you're guilty. We have to prove you've done it. In proceeds of crime, you have to prove you're innocent. So you have to show me that you got your money legitimately. Right. Your 8 holidays this year, your 2 Rolex watches in your door, your nice car on your drive. How did you get the money to pay for that? And if you can't show me that you got it legitimately, we can keep the money from that.
Love that.
So that's one of my favourite things about it. But absolutely, and actually, in some ways, that's the way that loan sharks are punished, because you're taking away their power base. If you take away their £1.2 million, they can no longer lend. And quite often that £1.2 million will be invested in a house, so they'll have to sell their house to pay that money back.
So it really, really doesn't pay.
It does. It has teeth. It really does.
The illegal money lending team started in 2004, so happy 20th birthday.
Thank you. September the 6th it is this year.
September the 6th. It was a pilot in Birmingham, was that right?
Yes, and one in Glasgow as well originally. So before that, it had been 20 years since the prosecution. People don't walk into police offices, housing offices, trading standards departments and say, help, I'm the victim of a loan shark. So the initial pilot was very much, do loan sharks exist or are they urban myth? And it was from that we went national in 2008.
And what I love is that you are a trading standard agency, which I hadn't really understood what that meant, but you have special powers. So as a trading standards agency, you can investigate. You're the only agency who can investigate and actually prosecute illegal money lenders, but you have the power of search.
We do.
So if you suspect somebody's doing something dodgy, you can go into their premises and search. And you have the power of seizure. So you can take anything you think might be relevant to a criminal case.
Absolutely.
So tell me some of the things you can seize.
Ooh, all sorts of things. So we found cash in some weird places in the past. We found cash in a Hoover. We found, literally going into a property and there's cash stepped up the stairs and there's like £1,000 on each step. We've found one of my favourites. We went into a house and the wife was sort of stood in front of this big pot of stew on the stove. And it turned out that they'd put SIM cards in to the pot of stew when we knocked the door to try and get rid of the SIM cards. So basically, we can look for evidence of illegal lending. That tends to be cash. We can seize things like sometimes loan sharks will take security against a loan. So they might have a big stash of passports that they've taken off people. And that's what people have had to give them as security. We've had jewellery taken as well as security against the loan as well. What else, Anna? What else do we tend to seize?
Laptops, mobile phone devices, little USB fobs, anything that we think may show what they've been up to, we're going to be taking. Sometimes victims or borrowers will tell us, they've got my wedding ring. And so we will keep a keen eye out and look for that.
Sometimes we'll have to take like a safe cracker with us if they've got a safe so that we can get into their safe. Some police forces have cash dogs. So they actually, in the same way you have a drug dog, sniffer dog, they have cash dogs. So they'll send the cash dogs in to try and smell out where the money might be hidden. I could do with one of those in my house, but they find a fortune on the back of the sofa and that the kids have secreted away in different places over the years.
And so you've got police officers seconded to come in and work with you.
Yes.
So they come in and they bring their cash sniffers, but they can also seize evidence of other illegal activities. So your trading standards, you're entirely focused on illegal money lending.
Absolutely. If we took drugs and drove it in the car, we'd be in trouble. Whereas the police officers can do that. It also gives us power of arrest, which we don't have. They have power of arrest as well. But it's interesting because we are a local authority, obviously. We're hosted by Birmingham City Council and we actually prosecute for every offence that we find. So that tends to be illegal money lending and money laundering. They're the two standard ones, but we've prosecuted for blackmail, for assault, for GBH, for rape. These are all in extreme cases, obviously. But there's not many local authorities that you see with GBH and ABH on a docket at court. And that's because we want to show the courts the kind of entirety of the criminality. You know, we don't want people to say, oh, they didn't have an authorization to lend money. You know, it's bureaucracy. It doesn't mean anything. No, actually, it means that they're acting underneath the radar in nefarious means, and it means that they are resorting to all sorts of criminality, and that needs to be shown to the court so they can pass the correct sentence and show the community that, you know, justice will be served.
Yeah, it's not paper pushing, it's real impact.
Absolutely.
And some of the impact you've had over the last 20 years, you've supported over 31,000 people. You've written off over £91 million in debt. You've accumulated sentences over 600 years in jail from your prosecutions.
Absolutely. The biggest one for me, I think, is the number of people helped, because, you know, for every one of those 31,000 people, there will be a story. There will be somebody who was not sleeping. There will be somebody whose marriage was under threat because they hadn't told their partner about this loan and it was eating away at them. There'll be somebody's kids who were scared on a Thursday because the money man called. And that's the thing I think has the biggest impact.
I want to talk about regulated legal lending and specifically payday loans or the high-cost short-term credit market. So payday loans are regulated by the Financial Conduct Authority, but prior to 2014, they were regulated by the Office for Fair Trading, so under the Consumer Credit Act. And I worked in the consumer credit space around that time, and it was fairly light touch regulation. It was a big change for the industry as a whole, not just payday loans, moving over to the FCA. And so in 2014, the FCA assumed responsibility kind of from April. And the biggest payday lender at the time, a company called Wonga, they were founded in 2008. They turned profitable in 2009. In 2014, they said, watch out, because if you tighten the rules too much on payday lending, you're gonna put firms out of business and you're gonna force people to illegal alternatives. So 2014, the FCA comes in and starts regulating. They start by putting a price cap in place, and they put in a few other changes. 2015, Wonga, the biggest lender, flips from a 40 million profit to an 80 million pre-tax loss. So straight away becomes loss-making after years of profitability. And the market starts falling off a cliff. So pre-regulation, there are about 10 million loans a year. Post-regulation, straight away, that's down to 5 million. By 2018, Wonga goes into administration. So, and 2/3 of the lenders have exited the market. So kind of what they foretold actually happened, which is this market fell off a cliff. People are out of business. People can no longer access high-cost short-term loans. And in 2020, the FCA commissioned a piece of research from PwC looking at who used high-cost short-term credit, kind of particularly repeat borrowers. And the number one reason for using it was, I didn't have any other option. This was my only choice. What do you think of that?
In terms of the bigger question of does regulation or more regulation of high-cost short-term credit equal loan sharks, I don't think we can honestly say. It's such an underreported black market, you know, underworld that loan sharks live in. I don't think we can ever say that A plus B equals C. There was some research done in Japan by an organisation called Policies, and they looked at increasing the regulation in the credit market and what that did. And it took 7 years for the loan sharks to emerge. They argued, they said what happens is that people do without, and then they go to family and friends, genuine family and friends. And at that point, it takes 7 years as well. So we're probably not seeing it yet, maybe, is the answer to the question as well. But it's always surprised me when we work with the borrowers from loan sharks, how many have not attempted to get credit from somewhere else.
That's interesting.
So they're not trying to get credit from somewhere else. They're literally saying, you know, well, Dave at work's offered me some money, so I'll borrow from Dave at work because that's easier because it's Dave. You know, and he sits over there and he's offered to lend me money and he doesn't credit check me. He's not going to make me deal paperwork. He's going to give me the cash at lunchtime. It's easy. That's what I'm going to do. I'm borrowing from my friend Dave. Maybe they were turned down 10 years ago and nothing's changed in their personal circumstances, so they wouldn't even be trying to get credit.
Many people have a negative mindset. They don't know whether they would be eligible for credit or not in the first instance. Because of their experiences, they tell themselves, I probably won't get this. I probably will be refused this. And so they don't even approach in the first instance. You know, the problem with loan sharking is it's so much easier for some people to say, actually, let me go to my neighbour, let me go to my colleague, because that way I'm more likely to be given money.
We know that some of the people we've worked with in the past would have been able to access credit if they tried. They would have been eligible. There was enough money coming in. Filling in paperwork feels onerous and feels too much and feels like, you know, to people that they're almost being judged in a way. You know, and am I good enough for this loan? So therefore, they're much more likely to borrow off Marie at the school gates who's offered to lend them 50 quid for school shoes. because that's a world that they're happy living in. And at the time you take out the loan, you probably think you could negotiate better with Marie if you couldn't pay her back next week than you could with a credit card company or a professional company,
Yeah,
because
'cause
if
she's your
computer says
friend.
no and she's
Yeah.
your friend.
If you think that you're going to be scrutinized with a bank, for example, if you tell yourself, I'm living paycheck to paycheck, there is nobody that's going to give me this loan. They're going to wonder how I'm going to pay it back, because I'm literally living paycheck to paycheck. I'm living outside of my means. A bank is going to say, you're not going to be able to afford to pay this back. I'm not going to approach them,
I think as well that, any legitimate loan company, one of the things they have to check is affordability. Because if you don't take affordability, you're in the world of financial ombudsman and you're going to be in a whole heap of trouble. And loan sharks don't. Because what they will do, they will lend money to literally anybody, and then they will make sure that the only person you pay back is them. Because they don't care if you can feed your kids or you can pay your rent or your mortgage or your electricity bill. They don't look at affordability. Quite often we will see people handing 80, 90% of their income over to the illegal lender, because that's what it is. And that's why I think you're never going to get rid of loan sharks by having a wonderful credit market. It's never going to work. There will always be people who that wonderful credit market cannot lend money to.
So that's really interesting, that last point you made there about you'll always have both operating.
Yeah.
And this kind of takes me back to some of the data I uncovered, which is so only 40% of people who you've supported actually approached a formal lender first. The majority were declined, so 80% of those 40% were declined, but less than half tried in the first place. And then when you look at who was using payday loans and actually what they liked about them, it was the speed and anonymity were really important factors for people in using payday loans. So kind of knowing they could get an answer really quickly, they could get the money straight away. But the demographics looked different. So the significant majority of people using payday loans were male, so 70% male. Almost all were in work, so over 9 in 10 were in work, which makes sense. It's a payday loan. That's what it's designed to do. But they didn't have characteristics of financial exclusion. So their access to credit cards and their access to overdrafts actually mapped the UK norms. So there was no inclusion gap for people using payday loans. Whereas when you look at who's using a loan shark from your 2023 report, 60% were female, which was actually really surprising. About half were employed. A quarter were single parents. And the age range was huge, from 19 to 91 over the last 20 years with the illegal money lending team. Can you talk to me a bit more about the demographic profile of who's using a loan shark and how that's changed?
So I think nationally what we've seen is, it's interesting when you said 60% were women, because when we've actually looked at loan sharks books, it's pretty much 50-50. But I think women are more likely to report and women are more likely to engage with us. So, and that's been fairly standard across the whole time we've been operating. The amount of loan has changed dramatically, which I found really interesting. So before COVID, 2019, the average amount someone was borrowing from a loan shark was $3,000. That was the average amount of a loan. Post-COVID, it's £500. Wow. It's come right back down. And I think that's one of the things we've seen sort of a shift in. Bigger spectrum now of people who we see using illegal money lenders across the country.
Once upon a time, it was people living in low income, low deprived areas. And now it's people who are in full-time employment, as we've said. That's me and you. Everybody, regardless of their circumstance, can be vulnerable to being in the clutches of a loan shark. It's no longer a specific or individual person or family. Everybody's impacted. And that's what I'm seeing a lot of.
I think as well, one of the things that's changed when we first started, we asked what was the loan for? Why did you take out this money? And it's always been kind of everyday living expenses. It's never been the big telly or the holiday abroad or anything else. It's been every day. Absolutely. Yeah. But historically, it's been one-offs. So it's been school uniform, white goods, the tyre burst on the car, something like that. And what we're seeing more and more in the last 12, 18 months is food and fuel.
Yeah.
I'm borrowing to put food on the table and to put money in the electric meter. That's why I've borrowed from. So it's still that kind of everyday living expenses, but we've shifted from the one-off to the everyday, literally the everyday, the food and fuel.
I want to talk about the cost of using a loan shark now. Tell me more about the cost of using a loan shark, because they're not quoting an APR. And I've heard the term double bubble.
So double bubble literally means you pay back twice what you borrowed. So
okay, that sounds simple.
It does, except you won't. So as an example, a guy we prosecuted who was lending on Snapchat to students mainly. And he said you pay back double bubble. But what actually happened was he wanted that money back within a month. So if you borrowed £500 on the 1st of June, you owed him £1,000 at the end of June. If you couldn't pay the £1,000 at the end of June, which in all likelihood you won't be able to, if you needed 500 at the start of June, you owed him 2,000 at the end of July and 4,000 at the end of August and 8,000 at the end of September because he doubled it every month. We've had loan sharks where if you've paid less than they said, so if they said we're coming for £400 and you've only managed to scrape together £312, they've still doubled it. So they've had another £800 on as a fee. But quite often, neither the victim nor the loan shark knows how much has been paid back or how much is still owed. That initial loan is simply a hook, and then they just come back for more and keep coming back for more, and they extort money out of you.
So I read a few examples which were completely shocking. So I read one example of a client borrowed £250 and he paid back over 17 years to the tune of £90,000. So a £250 loan converted to a £90,000 payback over 17 years.
It's a lot of money. And I think, that's an interesting one as well, because that was one where when the loan was taken out, it was a friend of someone his wife went to school with. So done through the community, and no mention of interest was made whatsoever when that loan was taken out. He thought he was paying back £250 on £250. That's what he thought he was paying back. And I think, they're not unusual cases either. They're not the kind of extreme examples that we give. And there's two ways I think it works. There's that initial loan which spirals so quickly you're never going to pay it back. And there's the loan shark that just traps you in a cycle of borrowing. So a lady we're working with at the moment, she borrowed £500 and she had to pay it back on payday as £1,000, double bubble. But because she'd paid back £1,000, she did pay it back. By the middle of the month, she's skint. She's got no money. So the middle of the month, she borrows £500 again. So on payday, she pays back £1,000. The middle of the next month, she borrows £500 again. Payday, she pays £1,000, begin on for 6 years. So she's basically giving this person £500 a month in interest every month for 6 years.
Wow, for 6 years. And that was something I found really interesting, which was actually the term that these go on for, because they're not short-term loans at all. In fact, less than a third of them sort of close out in under a year. And it was something like 20% were 1 to 2 years, another 20% were 2 to 3 years, another 20% were 3 to 6 years. I mean, really, really long terms.
And some of those will only have stopped because we intervened. Some of those would have gone on longer. People say to us all the time, it's one of the most heartbreaking things in this job, I'll pay them back and then I'll tell you about them, but I want to pay it off first. And you say, but you won't pay it off. And I've worked with clients where they've gone and they've got a credit card because they've had access to credit and they've maxed it out to pay the loan shark back. They've gone to their gran and they've borrowed £5,000 from their gran to pay the loan shark back, and the loan shark's still hammering on the door asking for more money.
Yeah. I think one of the issues is that loan sharks, more often than not, they don't necessarily have a structure in the things they do. They're constantly moving the goalposts. I'm reminded as we're sitting here speaking that we had one London job. I had a young victim who had borrowed £20. £20. £20 only. She was in receipt of benefits, universal credit. Within, 6 weeks, she was handing over her full £671 to this lender.
We see loan sharks where they won't actually lend you the money, they'll rent it to you. So, but we see this particularly with like business people. So if I will give you £5,000, you've got a cash flow issue in your business, I will give you £5,000 and the rent on that is 10% a month. So you're paying me £500 a month, but you're not paying it off. You're paying me £500 a month rent on that £5,000. So the balance isn't coming down, you still owe me £5,000. And until you can give me the full £5,000, you owe me £500 a month rent. And because you're paying me £500 a month rent, you're never going to have the full £5,000 because you can't save it. And we've seen cases like that where it's gone on for years, where the actual interest rate seemingly has been zero, but it's been about this renting this money rather than borrowing it.
Got it. So very expensive, much more expensive than a regulated credit agreement.
Absolutely.
But actually that's not the only cost, because there's a huge emotional cost.
Absolutely. On everybody as well, on the person who's borrowed, on their spouse or their partner, on their kids. Loan sharks, I always say it's more like coercive control. It's like domestic violence. So they will find out what's important to you and then they will threaten that. We've had loan sharks where the threat's been about telling a spouse about the loan, telling the boss about the loan. And that's absolutely terrifying for the victim involved. Cases where people are working in the UK and they've got a family elsewhere in the world, and the threat is about shame. It's about telling the people back home that, yes, you're working in the UK, but you're not paying your way. You're bringing the family name into disrepute because you owe money. But it's horrible. You see it as well. People who think they deserve this, people who've been made to think by the lender This is your fault. You took out the loan. You got yourself into this situation. I helped you out. So you will carry on paying me. And we've had people say, I don't deserve help. I don't deserve your help. I got myself into this. I took the loan. And you can sit down with them and say, but you've paid back 180 times what you borrowed. No one deserves that. But they won't have it that, I got myself into this. And it impacts on people's self-esteem, their mental health. People pushed, to the brink of suicide because of somebody else's greed. And it's absolutely hideous.
That was really surprising. The number of people who had attempted suicides, around 30% had thought about committing suicide, but actually more than 1 in 10 had made an actual attempt of the victims you've spoken to. And then the other thing that was really horrifying was the physical violence and the sexual violence that kind of came out in some of the reading. Anna, can you speak a bit more about that?
We've had people who have been forced into the escort business. We've been able to prosecute for rape. There are so many scenarios where victims have their well-being has deteriorated so much because of not only a perceived threat, but actual violence. We've come across some really awful scenarios, victims who have been threatened to have their properties firebombed. Victims have been kidnapped off the street or threatened to be kidnapped off the street. So many vulnerable women. I tell you what, when the kids are at school, I'll send a couple of the lads round. You give them sex. We'll let you off a figure for this week. And so we have to pay particular attention to the anxiety, the stress, and the mental health support needs that we identify as deteriorated. Imagine if somebody has been dealing with this type of behaviour over a significant period of time, experiencing threats of violence, actual violence, sexual violence, coercive control, so many types of behaviour. Within a week, there's going to be a change in that person's well-being. Imagine 2 years down the line, imagine 3 years down the line, the state, the emotional distress that some people are forced into at the time of contact with our team.
Let's take this back to the workplace, because again, around 1 in 5 people who are using a loan shark have met their loan shark. They're transacting through work. So everything you just described there about the emotional distress, the potential violence, the actual violence, the sexual assault. Imagine if that's a colleague. Imagine the additional element of that being a colleague. And so I want to talk a bit more about illegal money lending in the workplace. And I want to focus a little bit more on how employers can identify this and how employers can help. Can you tell me types of workplace that are particularly at risk for illegal money lending at work?
I think it could literally be anywhere, to be honest. I mean, we've had cases in hospitals, we've had cases in warehouses, in markets, logistics companies, even in local authorities. It could literally be anywhere where people go. And you'd think it might become less common now. We're all using Teams and not seeing each other face to face, but that doesn't seem to be the case. And I think, it may present in different ways. It may present as a dispute between two people. So it may present as two people who used to get on, suddenly not getting on. It may present as someone who avoids coming in. I remember one case where it came to light because the employee, the borrower, was challenged because they weren't going to work on payday. And the assumption of the employer was that they were out on the town having a brilliant time because they'd just been paid. In reality, they didn't want to see the loan shark on payday. In terms of what can be done, I think it's about encouraging financial resilience, looking at saving schemes and loan schemes through payroll deduction and things like that. But as a team as well, we will offer training. So we've been into certain organisations across the country and we've trained up their HR teams on how to spot this. Everything we offer is free of charge. We will do it on Teams or face-to-face, whatever suits you, and as many sessions as is needed. And I think we can just give people the tools to help them spot it, and then the confidence to know what to do once they have. So how do you actually refer someone to us in a way that's effective? But it's had real success where we've gone in and trained up HR teams around spotting illegal lending in the workplace and then successfully signposting it across.
I want to come back to a couple of things you just mentioned. So you spoke about kind of workplace loans and payroll savings. Can you go into those in a little bit more detail?
Yeah, I think it makes such a difference, doesn't it? Because I think that the joy of payroll savings is that money never hits your account. So you're not used to having it. You don't think it's almost not yours, is it? It gets siphoned off. So I think that, even just saving small amounts, it can help with financial resilience. When we're looking at loans of £500 when we're looking at things like white goods, car repairs, and things like that. Even a small amount of savings can make a difference to just sort of give you a bit of a head start when it comes to that. And the same as loans as well through the workplace. They're regulated, they're authorised. It's not dealing with Dave who sits 2 desks across from you. It's done in a way that is formalised and everything else with proper legislation in place to protect you as a consumer. And that's got to be better than borrowing from someone that you've got to see every day. We know people who are financially stressed, even if it's not a loan shark, even if it's mainstream debt, they don't perform as well. They're less productive. They have more sick leave. So it's in the employer's interest to get on board and help with this. That can be an incentive for someone to work somewhere. We're not in the world. Most of us aren't in the world anymore of big bonuses, are we? That ship has sailed. So actually being able to provide employee incentives like access to payroll loans and savings, that could actually keep some of your staff there rather than looking somewhere else.
And keep them more productive, potentially.
Absolutely, and happier.
Focused on work. All right. Well, we're just about to wrap up. This has been a really interesting conversation. Bearing in mind that this is the Invisible Worker podcast and it's exploring the financial lives of people in frontline and essential work, I always ask for what is one thing that you wish more people knew about this workforce?
I think it would have to be the impact on the individual. And like you said before, that it's so much wider than a financial impact. When we do talks and training and things like that, the thing that people gasp at is the APR and the amount that people have paid back. Whereas the thing that stays with me is people who haven't eaten for 3 days and have just fed their kid cornflakes because the loan shark's taking £900 of their £1,100 income that they work really hard for. So I think it's the human impact of illegal lending.
The one thing that I would love people to be aware of is that our team works really hard to get rid of illegal debt, to get it written off. That's the one thing I wish that everybody was aware of.
£91 million of illegal debt written off in 20
really
years.
Really proud of that figure.
Let's see if we can grow it.
Sure.
Thank you, Anna. Thank you, Cath, from the Illegal Money Lending team.
Thanks for having us.
Before you go, make sure you stay in touch. Please subscribe to the Invisible Worker podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you go to listen. That way you can follow along as we release new episodes. Thanks again and see you soon.